In today's Intentional Conversations, you're going to hear from our guest, Mary Quinn. She's the CEO of the YWCA here in Harrisburg. And you're going to get a little tidbit from her on how she leans into her leadership team to give her the break as a CEO to not always be working and thinking on the business. You're also going to gain some insights into her culture and learn more about her experiences of frustration, things that she was severely challenged with, and how she leverages all that for her own personal growth. I hope you'll enjoy today's conversation. Well, Mary, thanks for being here. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Glad to be here.
So I just want to kind of dive right in. When you were a kid, like 5, 7 years old, somewhere in there, what did you dream of being when you grow up?
So I think that's an interesting kind of question as I kind of thought about it. And I don't know that I can remember wanting to be one specific thing, but I did know what I didn't want to be.
Oh.
And I grew up in a home that was, poverty. And both of my parents, my dad worked in a factory and my mom was a waitress. And I, maybe not at the age of 5, quite understood that. But as I grew up, I recognized how hard that was for them to make ends meet and to have a family and the stress and all the consequences that go along with that. And I knew that I didn't want to work in those types of jobs that both of my parents felt, I think, very little respect for the work that they did. And, work was something to be endured and not enjoyed. So I developed at a young age knowing that I needed to get a better education than what they had and not to be, my dad worked every single overtime shift that he could get because not only, I think there's like a universality with people who kind of grow up in poverty and some of the things that they lack. But then I think there's a nuance of poverty that you live in with uneducated parents because they don't know how to, budget well. And so right. It's kind of a constant struggle along the way.
So you knew more about what you didn't want to do. What was the key trigger that for you made education? Why education? You mentioned education was important. Now, having been well educated, which you are, how has that played a role in how you saw things differently and developed and grew? How important is education?
Well, I knew that my mom never graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. And that was something that shamed her and she was kind of embarrassed by. And it also held her back. So for as much as she struggled, there was just no job opportunities for her except for those kind of service industry careers. And so I didn't know what I wanted in terms of education. I just knew that it was important and I needed to go to college.
And how did you filter that? How did you get to a decision of where to go? What was the process that led you into that?
There weren't a lot of opportunities. There was one choice, and it was community college.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you just did it.
Yep.
It was a fire, ready, aim kind of thing.
Yep.
And you discovered yourself along the way.
Yep.
Yeah. So maybe in that process, as you're entering into a community college, what might have been your biggest fear at that time? Or challenge, I mean.
I think there was the challenge. The biggest challenge was I didn't have a support system. I didn't have parents who knew how to navigate, even applying for college and what that looked like and how to structure, my credit hours and what that looked like. So, there was a lot of just kind of figuring it out as I went and relying on, a guidance counselor to tell me, all right, if you want to move to this next level, you're going to need this many credits. Right. And so, it was kind of muddling my way through for a while.
Yeah. Did you get the feeling a little bit like maybe even I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like even in current times as a CEO of an organization, oftentimes we feel a little bit alone, like on an island by ourselves. Was that a similar feeling, and how do they relate with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. As a CEO, it's really, all the accountability is yours for the good and the bad, and it's just on you. And maybe that is part of my upbringing is what prepared me to handle that responsibility as a CEO and to accept it and not fixate on it too much and seek out groups like Vistage, where you do have kind of more of a support system and an outlet for some of those decisions and struggles that you have as running an organization.
Yeah, so Vistage is a peer advisory group, right? That's where we met.
Yep.
And what would you say is the most powerful aspect of being among peers who are like-minded CEOs, business owners? And what do you find is the strongest or the biggest value that you get out of having some camaraderie of like-minded and people dealing with the same kind of things?
Yeah, one of the things that I loved about Vistage was the value system. This idea that people can be really successful. You can make a lot of money, but you can also have a very high degree of integrity while doing it.
Yeah.
You can care deeply about your employees and the relationships and the impact that you're having on the community. So that core value that I think is ingrained in Vistage and Vistage members is something that really appealed to me. But even just the simple things that I think we deal with as CEOs. Obviously, I'm running a nonprofit, right, and those other individuals in Vistage were running, huge, multi-million-dollar organizations that had to do with manufacturing. So very, very different organizations, but yet we all experienced a lot of the same, struggles, whether it was just concerns for hiring or perhaps, there were maybe a lawsuit that everyone kind of, as a part of doing business, it seemed like it didn't matter if it was a nonprofit world or a for-profit world. There were some similarities that I really valued as being in a peer group.
Yeah, and there are, I got to say, though, what you do takes a special person, and your staff have to be incredibly special people. The YWCA and what you do there is probably one of the better kept secrets, in my opinion, in our community in general. Just give us a little look inside of the day in the life at the YWCA and some of like the biggest challenges you have. Is it in the staff? Is it in the circumstances you come across? How would you share some of your thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely in the staff, because it does take a unique individual to work in the space that we work in. And most people confuse us with the YMCA.
Yeah.
So YMs and YWs were both started in London, England in the 1850s. And there was this whole idea of, if you've ever seen a YM logo, it has a triangle. And those triangles stood for mind, body, and spirit. So it was a faith-based organization when it started, a Christian-based organization. And as time went on, YMs gravitated towards the body. And that's why we see YMs as a health and fitness. And there are YMs represented all around the world. There are YWs represented all around the world. And YWs gravitated more towards the mind, because as a women's organization, there at that, late 1800s, early 1900s, women didn't have the right to vote. There were so many inequities in Western Europe and even in our country. And so women wanted to educate themselves on the issues that men were essentially making in law that affected them. So YW start gravitating towards this mind aspect, this advocacy aspect. And, as the world evolves, the suffragette movement, those types of things, and then civil rights. And there becomes a more awareness about things that affect women at higher rates than men, like domestic violence, like sexual assault. And now, most recently, we see human trafficking. Yeah. So the work that we do is in that space, a lot of crisis intervention, prevention, victim services. But you're right, most people don't know we exist. Most people don't know how large we actually are. Yeah. How many people, in a given year, we're serving about 10,000 individuals with direct service throughout the greater South Central Pennsylvania area. And we're providing, on site, we have 113 beds, a shelter for women and children. We do some community housing as well. We have an on-site preschool program. We have attorneys who represent our clients in civil legal representation. We do supported employment to help individuals find jobs. And we do a specialty in veteran services to help homeless vets and help them also find jobs. So we're doing all of this at kind of our main campus that sits like right at the edge of South Allison Hill. Yeah. And we're an 80,000 square foot facility. So in any given day, we have and we run 24 hours a day. So we have almost 100 staff, and we're running 24 hours a day. We're an essential service provider. During the pandemic, we weren't allowed. We just couldn't close. It's not something we can do because we're responsible for people in emergency situations. So, we've got with our clients, the community, our staff, on any given day, there's about 200 people that move through our building, seeking services, providing services. So it's a busy place, and there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of vicarious trauma that our staff experience when working with our clients day in and day out, and it's kind of seeing that darker side of society. And I think that's the other challenge that we have is it's not a pleasant thing to talk about. Most people don't want to talk about, domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking.
It's a tough topic. Yeah. Tough topics. And it's, as you said, so you and your organization, you're on call 24/7, right?
Yep.
How do you as a CEO, and I know as a business owner myself and other CEOs I've talked to, we feel that sense of 24/7 anyway, regardless of what we do. The difference in my business is I get to kind of shut it off and go home. How do you balance the fact that what you do and what your organization and how they serve the community is a 24/7, 365 entity that can never really shut it off, close it, and go home? How do you balance that in your life? What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, I would say when I first started, that made me very nervous. I felt a lot of anxiety about it. And I have really been very fortunate to build a leadership team who's responsible. So I know that there are things that rise to my level as a CEO, and for my own well-being and health, I don't get involved in some of, down in the weeds with some of the things that go on. So we certainly have situations in the middle of the night where somebody higher up is going to need to be called in. And it's likely not going to be me unless it escalates to a very serious situation, like a fire. And we've certainly had that. So then I'll get called in. Yes, we absolutely operate 24/7, but we also do, I think, a really good job of training staff to know where their responsibility is and how things could trigger, phone calls or, people getting called in. So I think, I've built a really good team about that and feel pretty good about being in the organization, being in good hands when I can't be there.
So what might be the, call it 3 top things you feel you've done well to build a good team? Because building good teams is critical to the success and for going forward of an organization. It's also critical to allowing you some time to have some peace in your day. So what are the 3 things that come to mind that you've done that you think are effective in building leadership teams?
So of my leadership team, of the 3 people who report directly to me, were all promoted from within. And I had an opportunity to build a relationship with them, to see the quality of what they did and how it was received within the organization. And so in that regard, I feel very fortunate that I had that kind of perspective and to put individuals who were already with the organization and knew it well into the position that they're at. It certainly also built a lot of loyalty that I believed in them. But I think one of the best things, and this is certainly not pandering in any way, but one of the things I really loved that we did was the work with YWCA Group in building the culture. Like we did a strategic plan, right? We figured out like what are those kind of large buckets and categories that we should always be focusing on and who's responsible for what. And that was a great organizational tool. But what I felt a huge value, because I think our mission can be very ambiguous and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, including our staff. And we don't get a ton of support from a national organization. They want you to kind of figure it out. It's our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women, and we see it as a very moralistic, ambitious mission, whereas it can also be seen as very controversial political statement. And so we're kind of left to navigate that and help people understand what that means in relation to our services. Because I would be asked, what are you? Are you a direct service provider or are you an advocacy organization?
Right.
And it was really hard to kind of tie and say, okay, here's why we're an advocacy organization, just the evolution of how we evolved as an organization and how that advocacy translated into the direct services that we provide. And what that looks like. And through that sort of culture assessment that we created and the story around who we are, what our mission, vision, values were, and what our core purpose is for the work that we do, made, I think, just a huge difference. It made it really easy for me to be able to talk to the media about what we did. It makes it really easy for me to even pivot a question I don't like and go right back to that, those culture statements about what it is that, we value and who we want to be and how we want to behave even internally with our staff. That made a huge, huge impact, I think, on the organization. It created a lot of buy-in, even with my board. And I think it helps solidify even my leadership team to say, okay, this is kind of who we are and how we want to lead the organization.
Good. Got just a couple minutes left. What's on the horizon? How long do you keep doing what you're doing? What's your vision for your future?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a great question. I believe, and I didn't ever envision myself being the CEO of the YWCA. That wasn't as I said, I really knew that I needed to be well educated and prepared. So when opportunities presented themselves, I could walk through that door. I could take that opportunity because I had the background and the credentials and the work ethic and all of that. So I don't know. There's not a real plan. Okay. I love the YWCA and the work that we do, and I always try to remember that every situation that I get frustrated with or struggle with is an opportunity for me to learn and grow. I've learned so much professionally and personally about myself and the things that I value, how I want to lead, how I want to be a better person. And we know that, life is finite and precious, and I'm never going to be a superstar, the tennis pro that I would like to be, and get a lot of fame that way. So hopefully I can also feel really great about just knowing that we made an impact in the world through the work that we did while I was leading the YW.
That's great. Well, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today for Intentional Conversations. Our hope is that this will inspire you at some level, something you've heard today that will be a takeaway for you. Maybe you'll share it with a friend or a family member or someone in business. Intentional conversations are exactly that. They're made to be intentional. I hope you have some.